Evil dies tonight. Evil dies tonight. Evil dies tonight.
Yes, yes, yes. Evil dies tonight. I get it, Andrew. We'll get into that into this review. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Cade and I'm joined by my friend Andrew, and this is going to be our review for Halloween Kills from 2021. So, Andrew, when it comes to Halloween Kills, where does this movie sit in the franchise with you? Is it one of the weaker ones? Is it one of the stronger ones? Or is it more in between? Well, where does it sit for you?
This is a very middle of the road movie for me. And the reason I say that is because there is some really god awful movies in this franchise. But I wouldn't say, and while I'm not a huge fan of this one, and we'll get into the reasons why, I don't find it as bad as, say, Halloween 4, Halloween 5, Resurrection, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. Yeah, it's just kind of just here, in all honesty. Like, kind of just, I could take it or leave it.
Well, and I will, before we get into our pros and cons, I will acknowledge this. When it comes to this timeline in the Halloween franchise, I will say that I know that people have their issues with this movie and Halloween Ends, but I honestly prefer this timeline over the other ones.
Well, yeah, because at least this one you can actually keep it straight, unlike the other, five other timelines in this franchise.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, why don't we get into our pros and cons? So, first up, I think one thing that I do want to acknowledge, and I think you feel the same way, is this movie has some pretty, I think, memorable kills. I can think of a whole bunch of different ones. I can think of the scene where Michael's taking down all the firefighters, or his scenes where he's going after or fighting the mob. I think that they all have unique kills to them. And I think what's nice about them in this movie is, unlike the first one, while I still do like the first one, in this one, we actually get to see the kills happen on screen.
Yes, and if you think back, because we did review the Halloween from 2018 on our here on the channel, that was actually one of my complaints with Halloween 2018 was that it didn't really have a lot of memorable kills because a lot of them were off screen. This one, almost all of them are on screen, and a lot of them are memorable in very different ways. Like for me, the ones that come to mind is Sandra getting stabbed through the neck with the broken light tube. That is just, I don't know, for some reason that just sticks with me, even though that's not technically a kill, but we'll talk about Halloween and some other time. All of the firefighter deaths I thought was a really fun, well choreographed, really well shot scene too.
Yeah, that's, I think, another pro about this movie. I think that this movie is shot very well. And I attribute a lot of that to the cinematographer and David Gordon Green. I think, David Gordon Green, I think you can tell that with this movie, he's a lot more comfortable with directing horror than he was in the first movie. Well, I still do prefer the first movie. I think, yeah, again, you could kind of tell that he's more, he felt more comfortable directing it in that environment in that way.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. And again, like I said, the cinematography in this movie, especially when there's like multiple people in frame at once,
Yes.
like you mentioned, the firefighter kill at the beginning of the movie, which is probably like the best scene in the movie. And then again, when Michael gets cornered by the mob at the very up towards the end of the movie, it's all shot and lit very well. It gives kind of, I don't even really know how to put it, not really like comic book vibe, but just it's got a feel to it that I quite like.
Oh yeah, the same. And aside from, Michael taking on the firefighters or him fighting the mob at the end of the movie, one sequence that I think is another standout, just because not only because of how it's shot, but also just the way it's executed in general. I love the opening sequence of this movie where it flashes back to 1978 and we see what happened after Michael had his run in with Laurie, when we see him going back to his home and we see Hawkins following him, and then we have that confrontation between them. I actually think the opening sequence was done very, very well. And to me, it actually felt a lot like the original in some way. Not exactly, of course, but it did a great job, I guess, paying homage to that movie.
Yeah, I agree. Admittedly, that was actually not something in my notes that I'm kind of surprised I forgot to include that. But they did a very good job at making it feel like it was filmed in the 70s. I remember, I can't remember if it was like a behind the scenes thing, but they talked to like the costume designer and talked about how she had to mimic find the right materials, make it look like it was from the 70s. And probably the most impressive thing was that they just had an actor on set who looked so much like Donald Pleasance that they literally just had to dub in a different voice.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something done very well. So, yeah, that's definitely another standout. One other thing that I do want to mention, one thing that I think this movie has a little bit better than the first one, I think that in terms of the tone of this movie, I think it's a little more tonally consistent than the first movie was. And here's what I mean by that. So Well, the first movie, the tone of that movie was fine, but I think there were parts of it where it was a horror, but I think parts of it also felt kind of like comedic in that way, which is fine. Sometimes horror movies have comedic moments to it, but I think the comedic scenes in that movie are kind of lost in this one. It's a lot darker and it feels a lot more tonally consistent than the first movie did. It feels more like a full-on horror slasher film in that way.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that. It does have, in my opinion, the single funniest moment in the Halloween franchise in this movie, which is Vanessa accidentally shooting herself because the car door knocks the gun into her head. I don't know. I just find it's like Looney Tunes levels of hilarious to me for some reason. I do have another one I can talk about though, which is I love the remix Halloween theme for this movie. I like how it was John Carpenter and his son. I want to say his name's Cody, who actually did the remixing for the theme, and I thought it sounded pretty good.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And we're talking about one of the most iconic horror movie themes of all time.
Oh yeah, of course. I think that that's definitely a standout, and I especially love how it's used just the right amount, which is nice. They use it at the beginning and at the end, but they also use it a couple of, like, I think one other time in the movie. And what's nice about it is they really utilize it well. They don't overuse it, which was nice.
Yeah, though there is another part of this movie that they use way too much, and we will definitely talk about that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a good point. Why don't we get into our cons now when it comes to this movie? Now, first off, I think that we should talk about. So, first off, I want to talk about the plot of this movie. I think that when it comes to the plot, it's not a very, I get that it's part two in a trilogy, but I think that it doesn't feel like a very complete story. It doesn't have too much of a story to tell with this movie.
Yeah, no, it's not really even like one. Well, there is like one single plot line that kind of weakly runs through the whole movie, but it kind of feels more like three or four plot lines in the same movie.
Yeah, but which is fine. A lot of movies have different storylines intertwining, but I think that my issue with it is, so the main, like, Michael's main motivation throughout the movie is to go back home, which I you find that out at the end, that he never really cared about Laurie Strode. He just wanted to go home the entire time, which I guess that's a twist, but I feel like that's something he could have done back in the first movie.
Yeah, yeah. Because I can't remember who put it, but somebody described it best. Like this movie struggles in the fact that it is the middle movie in a trilogy.
Yeah, and I think because of that, there's a lot of moments where it feels like they're just kind of killing time. And that's what I think a lot of second movies and trilogies are. They're just meant to, not all of them, I'm saying, but some of them are just meant to kill time until you get into the real stuff. And yeah, there were a couple of, I think, unnecessary plot points that, like, one that comes to mind is the whole subplot with the escape patient Tivoli, when he's the other escape patient who shows up at the hospital and everyone thinks that it's Michael. And the whole time I was just thinking, okay, what is this really necessary? Also, can you not tell that he's not Michael? This short guy is not the tall domineering guy with the mask on. You think that that's Michael? And also, it's just being done at the hospital just to kill time, because to me there just isn't really much plot to this at all.
Yeah, and that actually ties into my biggest issue with this movie. There is a lot of dumb decisions made by characters in this movie.
Yeah, which, but just to be fair, that does happen in horror movies kind of a lot.
I know, but oh god, it just felt especially egregious to me in this movie for some reason. Like I don't know, Sandra trying to leave out her back door instead to face Michael. Okay, that's dumb. Little John standing in front of Michael and doing nothing like an idiot to fight back. That's dumb. The mob attacking Tivoli in the hospital, even though they have no idea if it is Michael, and there is plenty of context clues to show that he's not. For instance, why would Michael Myers willingly be going to a hospital and talking, trying to get help, when the whole thing is he's silent? And then my biggest one is at the climax when the mob story, Karen, instead of double tapping Michael while she's literally got him on the ground with a pitchfork to his head, instead of killing him, chooses to grab his mask and run away, trying to lure him to the mob. That was just an incredibly dumb moment to me.
Well, and I think another moment that comes to mind is the scene where, between Big John and Little John, when they're inside the house, when they realize that someone's in there, when Michael comes back to his childhood home. instead of leaving the house when they see blood on the wall, they decide to lock the doors and start searching rooms separately to fight back. I mean, guys, really, you couldn't have just called the police and left. You had to fight back. Really?
Oh yeah, I completely forgot about that scene, but that's also pretty dumb.
Well, and also, and this probably isn't something I should think about too much, but you notice how most of the mob, only a couple of them had guns. Most of them had baseball bats and wrenches and crowbars or hockey sticks. I gotta be honest, there were moments where I was just thinking to myself, don't don't people have any guns? Don't more people have
My
guns?
my favorite was the woman who showed up with the iron.
Yes, yeah, I remember that. Yep.
I just thought I noticed that in the background. I'm like, okay, not my first choice.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I know that characters in horror movies make a lot of stupid decisions, but that's kind of an issue with a lot of horror movies, like I said. And honestly, when characters do that, it kind of makes them harder to root for, in my opinion.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, do I really want to root for somebody who is making such dumb decisions and is probably going to get themselves killed in the process? Yeah, that's when characters start turning more into meat bags than characters.
Yeah, and I think another con that we both have definitely would have to be
Can I do
Lori.
it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Evil dies tonight. Evil dies tonight. Evil dies tonight. Rinse and repeat 500 freaking times over the course of the movie. We get it.
Yeah, that line is definitely used a lot. I mean, if they had just used it, I guess a couple times, maybe it would have hit harder. But yeah, they just kept saying it. But no, aside from the whole "Evil Dies Tonight" part, I think one part of the movie that I did have my issues with was how the movie utilizes Laurie Strode. So I understand that in the last movie she had been stabbed and she was injured, but if you think about it, she spends most of this movie in a hospital bed, and I don't know. It's just kind of not that fun to see because Laurie Strode is one of the best horror protagonists ever created, and you're just having her spend this whole movie not really doing much, and it's just kind of hard to see.
Yeah, and this actually ties into what I mentioned a little bit ago. I have a part of this movie that is both a pro and a con simultaneously. The pro is I like the fact that this movie does something original with the Halloween story. It is not just Laurie versus Michael. It explores the effect Michael Myers has had on the town of Haddonfield as a whole, and how the paranoia and fear about him kind of spreads and causes people to lose their minds. However, this is also a con because, like you mentioned, it kind of leaves Laurie sort of sidelined for the entire movie to the point where you start to wonder, why was she here in the first place? Kind of feels like tacked on. And yeah, again, if you're gonna have her there, use her somewhat.
But despite that, and I know that this is something that we both like, I do, and I do agree with you. I do like the scenes that she has with Frank in the hospital, their moments together. I actually did like those because, it showed us what Laurie, it's another way of seeing what Laurie had gone through in between this movie and the movie in 1978. And I think it was also another way to explore Frank's character as well.
Yeah, and that ties into it was nice to see some of these old characters come back, see Sheriff Brackett, see Tommy Doyle, see Lindsay, see Nurse Marion. And a lot of the times it was the same actor. So I thought it was just, kind of nice, kind of further emphasizes that this is, one continuous storyline. But again, it ties in to what I mentioned a minute ago. Yeah, it's nice to explore this new option, but if you're going to do that, just don't use Laurie, period. I think that would have been even better. Maybe save her for the third movie.
Yeah, that could have been an option. But yeah, I think one other con that I have would have to be Michael himself. Now, don't get me wrong, Michael is terrifying in this movie. He's absolutely brutal. He's everything that I want to see from Michael Myers. But here's the biggest question I have after finishing this movie. Is Michael supernatural or not? Because I think the movie never really answers this or explains it too much. He's presented as this unstoppable force, which, yeah, that's usually what Michael is. But they also say that with each kill, he gets more powerful. And yeah, watching the movie, I kept thinking, so he is supernatural. So this isn't more realistic. We're actually seeing him as this kind of supernatural presence, but the movie doesn't really answer that. And yeah, it's just kind of a con for me in that way.
Yeah, and I agree because that's something that's never really cleared up in this movie, and it sure as hell isn't cleared up in Halloween Kills either,
Halloween
or
Ends.
Halloween Ends.
Yeah, I see where you come from with that. But yeah, what would you give this on a scale of 1 to 10?
Uh, well, like I said, even though I did have a lot to complain about with this movie, I don't. It's not not my least favorite Halloween movie. There's still far worse in this franchise, but there was a lot to complain about. So I'm going to say like 6.5. I think it's just kind of it came and went and didn't leave that much of an impact on me, really.
Yeah, I think I'll have to agree. 6.5 seems like a good amount. But yeah, either way, I don't think it's a necessarily a bad entry in the franchise. It's just not as strong as some of the more memorable ones like the original or Halloween 2018. But all in all, I'm still fine with it. All right, guys, I think that's the end of our review. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you later.
Evil dies tonight.